They don't work in here? Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Everyone okay on that? Sorry about the switch. We just, we're trying to do 2 options for adult classes, and Carrie and I were talking about we didn't know who would go where, and looks like the majority came here, so swap the classes. So we'll announce next Sunday as well, but we'll stay in here. Carrie will stay in there. I know that the numbers will fluctuate somewhat because the college people are here and then they're gone and they're here again. We don't know always when they'll be here and when they won't be here. Sometimes they're in town, sometimes they're not. So we love you. We're not saying anything bad about you. We're just saying that's in flux. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to focus on the book of Galatians. And of course, when we get into the studies of Paul's letters, how many letters did Paul write? 13 letters, maybe 14 if you count Hebrews. Personally, I don't, but it's not anything to fall out of fellowship with me over. So there are 13 letters. Now, when scholars come to look at Paul's letters, they actually only count 7 authentic letters and then 6 what they call dubious or secondary. They're not sure that Paul actually wrote them. I'm fully convinced Paul wrote all of them. I'm just making you aware of the fact that some of Paul's letters are considered of a secondary status by other people. And you may run into some of those when you're studying with others, when you're talking with them. You may be talking with someone and mention something, say, from the book of Ephesians, and they'd say, wait a minute, Ephesians is not supposed to be part of the Bible. Well, that's where they're getting it from. That's one of the doubtful letters of Paul. Galatians, however, is not one of Paul's doubtful letters. It is one that to a scholar, it doesn't matter how liberal a critic they are, they're going to accept Galatians. And there's a reason for that. When they count authenticity, and this is the arbitrary nature of what they're doing, they say that Paul dwells on certain themes a lot. And so in the 7 authentic books, he dwells on those themes a lot, and then on the doubtful books, he doesn't dwell on those themes. But the whole point is you've already determined what you think Paul should have dwelt on, and you go to find the books that fit that paradigm. And the ones that don't fit that paradigm, you say, well, Paul couldn't have written that because it doesn't fit my paradigm for Paul, which is idiocy. But that's how it's reasoned. Okay. Among those, they think that Romans is Paul's crown jewel, right? Romans is the most authentic Paul that you can get. When you come to the book of Galatians, it has a nickname. Does anyone know what the nickname of Galatians is? They call it Little Romans, because most all the themes that Paul deals with in the book of Romans are dealt with also in the book of Galatians. And so that's kind of why we're going to go through Galatians. I like it as a letter. There's some very unique features to it. There's also some very common features that we see in other Pauline letters, and we'll bring some of those out. But I love to talk about Galatians. Today is going to be an introduction and maybe the first few verses of chapter 1. What I have outlined, we're going to spend about 2 weeks per chapter. That'll give us 12 weeks. We have 13-week quarters, but we're missing one for Christmas, so we're down to 12 weeks. So we'll have to get into chapter 1 a little bit today, if not all of it that I had planned. But anyway, so we have the whole idea. Let's talk about, first of all, this idea of the occasion of the writing. Why did Paul write Galatians?
Some people are apparently adding.
They're apparently what?
We're apparently adding in and tweaking the
gospel. Oh, man, I love that word. They are tweaking the gospel. They're adjusting it to their ideas, to their paradigm. Now, traditionally, we've always read, about the Judaizing teachers and that they were requiring Gentiles to go through the law for justification. That's often referred to today as the old perspective of Paul. There is a new perspective of Paul. Has anyone ever heard that phrase before or read anything on the new perspective of Paul? There was an article a couple of years ago in Gospel Advocate that they addressed it, and it's kind of today that's the big thing, the new perspective of Paul. Basically what it says is that instead of trying to make them go through Judaism or go through the law for justification, the new perspective says they are going through the law for sanctification. All right, so you got two big words here, right? Yeah, he's laughing because there's really not a lot of difference between the two. But we've got this idea of justification and sanctification. What is the difference between the two?
One is you're justified in what you've done in the past, and the next one is you've been set aside for something special.
Very good. So, college kids know I can't spell. So, all right. One is justification is about having your past justified or forgiven. It's the forgiven that the whole idea is that you are declared free from any guilt that you've ever had. That's what salvation is. We talk about salvation most often in a present tense. Someone comes to us, we study the Bible with them, we baptize them, and we say they're saved, right? That's a present tense idea. They're justified at that time. However, we also talk about salvation as a future tense, right? That after we're baptized, we have to live by certain strictures, right? We need to be Christian. And that process of Christian living is what we mean by sanctification. Sanctified comes with it the idea of being clean, right? So we've been washed clean by the blood of the Lamb at baptism, but now we have to live clean. So this huge debate on the old perspective of Paul and the new perspective of Paul really comes down to there's not a lot of difference there. It's controversial to some people, but Paul, are they requiring people to go through the law to live as Christians, or are they saying that the Gentiles have to go through the law to become a Christian? Yeah, there's throughout the New Testament there's a lot of tension between the passing away of the old order and the entering in of the new order. And how much overlap is there? Is there any overlap? Is there some overlap? Is there a lot of overlap? Is Christianity just an extension of Judaism? Right? So those are questions that they're seeking to answer. Look, that's what they're struggling with in the book of Galatians. Is this Jew-Gentile relationship. And we just had in the bulletin, if you read the article there about overcoming prejudice, it's about Cornelius, who is that first Gentile convert, right? That's what we often refer to him as the first Gentile convert. We don't often talk about the Ethiopian eunuch, who may have been in the same situation as Cornelius. He's from Ethiopia, right? He's gone to Jerusalem to worship, but it appears that Cornelius was also a worshiper of God, of the Jewish God. Oftentimes we say of the eunuch, he may have been a proselyte, although there's nothing in the text that says he was a proselyte. He may have been a born Jew, part of the diaspora. We use the word diaspora. Anyone know what that is, the diaspora? Okay, right. So it's the dispersion. So diaspora. And so you have the prefix dia from the Greek meaning, it's a preposition meaning to go through or throughout, right? And then spora. What does that sound like? Spores, seeds, right. And so in the Greek, sperma, which in different tenses would be spora. So diaspora, the seeded throughout the world is the idea, or scattered throughout the world. And so the Jews, there was a large Jewish population, for example, in Elephantine, Egypt. There was one in Rome. And we'll talk about that one in just a moment. There's some in Corinth. Just in a lot of places there was a Jewish contingent. And so some were large, some were small. Well, North Africa, were there Jews there? Yes, there were. Is it possible that the Ethiopian eunuch was just a Jew? Yeah, it's possible. What we don't have is the answer to those questions. So we couldn't be dogmatic and say, well, he was a Jew. Well, he was a proselyte. He was a Gentile. So we can't be that way. But what's the significant difference between the eunuch and Cornelius, though? Huh?
He didn't stick around there.
Okay, he went back home. That's a good one. But who taught him? Philip and Peter. Was that what you were going to say?
No, I was going to say that if Cornelius was worshiping God, it doesn't appear to be worship according to Judaism, whereas the Ethiopian eunuch looked.
At least he's going back to Jerusalem for that.
He had all the scripture in his possession.
Yeah.
In English.
So, how does it describe Cornelius? I know we're off Galatians now. Go figure. How's Cornelius described in Acts 10 verses 1 through 3 or so? He's devout. What? Righteous. One who he prayed, gave alms, right? But there's another one in there, that big one. He feared God. That's right. He feared God. So he feared God. He behaved righteously in praying and giving alms, and he is a devout or righteous or just man, right? So when Peter comes along and he preaches to him, later he says, now I am believing or coming to understand that God is not a respecter of persons, but in every nation he who what? Fears God, which Cornelius did, and what? Acts righteously, or works righteousness, literally, which Cornelius did. And then he says, is acceptable to God. So everything Peter described as far as what a righteous person is, one that's acceptable to God, is exactly what Luke has already told us that Cornelius was. That's a conundrum, isn't it? Because then you get in that great debate, at what point was Cornelius saved? We won't get into that one today, but that whole idea is certainly something that we need to be thinking of. But back to Galatians now. So the occasion of the writing here is that they are some people are tweaking or manipulating how Gentiles become Christians. Now, there's a lot of let's go down our deal. So, who's the author? Obviously, we've already, right, Paul, we've already pretty much. How about the audience? The churches of Galatia, right? So there's another, scholars, what they like to do is they like to take 2 or 3 words and spend a lifetime looking at them and pulling them away from everything else. And so, where's Galatia? What is Galatia? Okay. It's in Asia Minor, yeah. Let me. All right, so let's. Yes, somewhere. All right, we're going to pretend that's Italy. And then, I know it's not great. Here's the Peloponnesus. And then we're going to go over to the Ionian shore, down the Mediterranean, all the way down to Israel. So here's our Jerusalem, just for frame of reference. I'm not a cartographer, so no comments on that. Over here we're going to have Corinth, right? And Athens, just a little above. No, I'm sorry. There's Athens. So this is modern day Greece here. modern day Rome here. There is an island here that's out. What island is that? Cyprus, that's exactly right. So when Paul goes on his missionary journeys, on the first missionary journey, he goes to Cyprus, crosses across the island, goes from here up to the mainland here, goes into Antioch of Pisidia, which is going to be right around in there. David, did y'all go to any of these places here? Antioch.
Cyprus.
Okay.
Ephesus, in that area.
Okay, all right. So Ephesus is going to be a little closer to the shore over in here on the Ionian shore. And of course, it has the port city of Miletus. But it doesn't look near as good up there as it does on my pad here. All right, so he goes up into Antioch of Pisidia. And then in Acts 13 and 14, he goes through a series of little towns out here. Iconium, Lystra, Derbe. Then he goes back through them again, right? And this region right in here, actually it goes down to the shore, is called Galatia. So think of like a state in Asia Minor, Galatia. It's a region, has several cities in it. You know, don't show me a map, Cliff. That just makes me feel bad. So here's Galatia. It's a region. So there are several towns that Paul has been to on his first missionary journey. And many believe that that's who he is writing to these, Lystra, Derbe, not a B, and Iconium. Right? So those are the main ones. And you throw the Pisidian Antioch in there too. Although Pisidian Antioch was actually technically in the region of Phrygia. But so these are the main cities of what they call the southern Galatia theory. Then there's the northern Galatia theory. And the reason why there's a difference is because around this time, Galatia is restructured to be a state kind of in the north, and it loses some of its southern region. So is Paul writing to those when it was in the southern region, to the northern regions? To me, it really doesn't matter, but I do think that it helps us sort of date the book itself, which is kind of the where we are now. They're Christians, mostly Gentile Christians, but they are being afflicted by Jewish people. Maybe Jewish Christians, maybe just Jews that have come up to cause some harm. And I say that because, let's run back to the Cornelius episode for just a moment. It says that when the Holy Spirit falls on Cornelius and his household, that those that are with Peter, that are of the circumcision and believers, or believers of the circumcision, right? And he uses that word, what does he mean by the circumcision? Huh? Jews, right. Now, this is one of the first times that we see, one of the earliest times that we see, the Jews referred to as the circumcision. As we move further into the New Testament, though, chronologically, there you get like the circumcision party. And I think we see that hostility coming between Acts 10 and Acts 11, because in Acts 10, I think he just means there they were Jews. And that they would normally support the idea of circumcision for Gentiles, right? Fast forward to Acts chapter 11, it opens up. He's just spent some days, he's baptized Cornelius, spent some days there with him, eating, him and his circumcision people, Peter's entourage. He gets back home to Jerusalem, and what do they say?
What's your problem?
Huh?
What's your problem?
What's your problem? What are you doing eating with this guy? He's a Gentile, and you're baptized him. What do you think you're doing, Peter? And so he appeals to the fact that these people of his of the circumcision that were with him witnessed God's acceptance of Cornelius. That's the coming of the Holy Spirit. They witnessed it. Well, they eventually, verse 18, say, okay, yeah, God has accepted all the Gentiles. But who was it that was questioning him? It says that they were of the circumcision party. All right, that's the way most translations have it. A circumcision party. We're starting to develop within Christianity those who were past Jews who are saying, hey, wait a minute, we can't just let a Gentile come straight in. We've got to address this circumcision question, right? And so it eventually leads to Acts chapter 15, where they actually have a big gathering in Jerusalem to talk about circumcision. I mean, that's not something we normally like to talk about, but that's what was happening. What about a date? Does anyone know of a date or about where we see this happening?
The writing of the book?
Yeah, the writing of the book. Yes. Personally, I believe it is the earliest. I think it's the first of Paul's letters. There's a couple of reasons why I think that. One is it is a little different in that it is addressed to a region. All the others are addressed to a city or to an individual, right? A single church or to an individual. This one is to the churches of Galatia. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I start things, I'm not real good at it at the beginning, and then the more I do it, the better I get, type deal. And I think that's kind of why Romans, which is written later than most of the letters, is considered his crown jewel. He's getting better. So I think he's refining his technique when he's writing Galatians number 1. That's one reason. Another one is in Galatians chapter 2. We're obviously not there today, but in Galatians chapter 2, there's a big hullabaloo about circumcision. And he goes back to Jerusalem, right? And when he gets back to Jerusalem, he talks to some people about it privately, he says, but he does talk to some people about it. And then they assure him that things are well. And then of course you have the big episode with Peter in chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. So those are important events that help us date the book. Okay, number one, Paul dies probably 64. So we know that it had to be written before 64, right? So that gets us a little bit. We know it's before the destruction of Jerusalem because Paul dies before the destruction of Jerusalem. So that's not even in view here. When he gets to Corinth, for example, in Corinth, he meets with Gallio, who is the proconsul of Corinth, right? Gallio, we know from what we call the Gallio inscription. We get real imaginative with our names. It's an inscription in the city of Delphi that talks about the Roman officials that have been appointed, and one of them that was appointed was Gallio, who was appointed proconsul of Corinth in the year 51 and recalled in the year 52. That's a very small window, right? Small window, 51 to 52. And Paul is there and meets him. In fact, he goes before him as a judge. So Paul's in Corinth when? At least 51, 52. Right? And that's on his second missionary journey, by the way. So we have that date pretty solid. We have another date even before then that's pretty solid. It's the date of 49, which is when Claudius expels all the Jews from Rome. And among those Jews that are expelled from Rome, we're told in Acts chapter 18, were Aquila and Priscilla. And he meets them in the city of Corinth. So it's sometime after 49 that Paul meets them. Sometime during that time, Paul writes this book. And he goes to Corinth, probably in that 51 area, right after the Council of Jerusalem. So a lot of people look at chapter 2 of Galatians and Acts chapter 15 as overlapping probably in 49, 50. That's a pretty solid date. Personally, I don't think Galatians 2 corresponds with Acts 15. We'll talk about that more when we get to Galatians 2. I think it predates that. And so I would put the date of the writing probably in that 47 maybe 48, but probably around 47 time period. And then the theme. We've already kind of talked about that in the occasion. The theme, I'm going to say, is faith through Spirit. All right, so there's a lot of talk about faith, but there is a tremendous amount in Galatians about Spirit and spiritual living. And so, faith through the Spirit. All right, any questions on...
Yeah, you really said he tells them to teach the truth.
Yeah, that's, as we get into the text now, absolutely, that's the idea is that there is, that's not the button I wanted to push, that there is a need to teach the truth, absolutely. And go ahead.
Real fast with the
I'm
audience.
sorry, Jonathan, sorry.
Real quick with the audience. Racially, were the Galatians Celtic people?
Okay, so if you didn't hear Jonathan, he's asking if they were Celtic people. And the reason why that question comes up is because Galatia as a region was associated with Gaul, right? Gaal, which gave rise to the Celtic people. I don't know that we would say Celtic per se, so much as, I mean, it is a Roman colony, Roman province, and so there's going to be a lot of Roman people there.
Right.
But you do have, let me see if I can go back to my map because it's so good.
It was settled long.
Yes.
Before that.
Yes, and so the Celtic religion, the Druid religions and so forth, the mystic religion, they were certainly there. The Romans simply referred to them as barbarians, okay? Because they didn't understand what they said. And it just sounded like when they were talking to one another, they would go, ba, 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 you know, blah, blah, blah. And barbarian is from the word that just takes those blah, 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 blah sounds and makes barbarian. That's all they did. That's how they talked. So they called them barbarians. They did not speak the same language we spoke. And so there could they have been Celtic? Very, very likely, at least would have had some Celtic, if not Germanic influences, because you're going to have the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and things that are moving in as well from further north. Look, Rome was not despite Pax Romana, which is the Latin phrase for the peace of Rome. That's what Rome promised. We're going to come into your towns and your villages, and we're going to bring you the peace of Rome, the prosperity of Rome. How are we going to do that? Oh, we're going to station soldiers outside your door. We're going to make sure you don't have an uprising. That was the peace of Rome because, look, these were people that had been there for generations. That were not Romans, and they're being forced to live certain way, just like the Jews were forced to live a certain way by the Romans. Other nations and nationalities were also forced. The barbarians, the Acts talks about the Scythians, and all of these other nations were also oppressed by Rome, and they're also rebelling. And so the peace of Rome was a bit of a pipe dream for Rome. It was their forced behavior self, but there was always uprisings against Rome. From not just from the Jews, but from others as well. The major, Jewish uprising wouldn't come until about 130 A.D. with the Bar Kokhba rebellion, but there were skirmishes, we would say, with Rome, just as there was any other nation. So I've not read anything that said they were Celtic people, but there's definitely some connection with the Gaelic people, the Gauls, the Gaelic people. And so that would be the audience. Any other questions before we get into the...
Well, wouldn't all of the different empires that had come along have some effect in that area and people being mixed to some extent?
Sure.
From Persia to...
So we talk about, the move in Daniel, the statement in Daniel of the statue with the head of gold and the chest and the arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, and then the lower legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, right? And he says these are the next four empires. And he tells Nebuchadnezzar, you, O Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. You are Babylon, right? And then they would eventually be overtaken by a less prosperous but stronger, silver nation, which was the arms and the chest of silver, and the Medes and the Persians, the two-pronged approach, two nations that came together to overthrow the Medes and the Persians. If you've ever seen history, like historic movies, one that you got to watch with some filtering, but 300. Are y'all familiar with the movie 300? So that's about King Leonidas, who is a Greek, who is battling against the Persians. In this case, King Xerxes, who is trying to overthrow. And so it's again, don't watch it without some kind of filtering. But it is an interesting take on this battle of Thermopylae, which was where they fought and King Leonidas dies. A lot of embellishment, historical embellishment, obviously, in that film. But the premise is true that Persia was trying to come across. Do nations leave a footprint? So what is on the stele of the New York post office? Anyone know the famous quote from the post office?
Almost.
Neither. All right, will stop us from. Right. So, anyone know where they got that? Okay. That came from the Persians. The Persians had a Pony Express style mail system, and that was their motto. And so whenever we developed a Pony Express system here based upon the Persian model, which was King Darius, by the way, that we read about in the book of Daniel, that was King Darius that sets up that Pony Express system and uses that motto for their mail delivery system. So yes, the empires leave footprints, but no more so than Greece and Rome, and especially Greece. And so when Rome came in, they adopted a lot of Greco. What am I looking for? Yes. So, what's that? God's architecture, language, art. They adopted their philosophers. I mean, listen, when we talk about philosophy, who do we talk about? Who are the big three? Okay, those are the big three. Are they Greek or Roman? They're Greek. Who are the Roman philosophers? Right. Exactly. Cicero, Seneca. There's a few in there that we do go back and read, but generally, when we talk about philosophy, we're talking about the Greeks. Hippocrates. Who was Hippocrates? The father of medicine. Today, if you become a doctor, you've got to take what oath? Hippocratic oath. It was the oath of Hippocrates. Was he Greek or Roman? Greek, yeah. Well, what about, if you go to school and you want to punish yourself and you become a math major or whatever, and you've got to take geometry. Who wrote the 13 principles of geometry? No, not Pythagoras. Euclid, that's right. Euclid, is he Greek or Roman? He's Greek. And Rome came in and they said, "You know what? Y'all got some good guys there. We'll take them. Your gods, we'll make them our gods." So when you learned in 12th grade Roman mythology or Greek and Roman mythology, that's where we had you learn it in Oklahoma. I don't know if all of y'all went to school in Oklahoma or not, but we had to learn Greek Roman mythology in the 12th grade. And many of their gods, they would say, this is Jupiter, also known as Zeus. Well, that's a Greek name and a Roman name, but that's when the Romans adopted those Greco gods. Grecian gods. So that is called, by the way, the Hellenization of the world. Okay, that's Hellenization. In the New Testament, when you see, in the English, when you see the word Greek, like Greeks and barbarians, Greek, or the Grecian widows in Acts chapter 6, that is translated from the Greek word Helotes or Hellenes. So that's what Hellenism is the spread of Greek culture throughout the world. And they had the the missionary of Hellenism was Alexander the Great. He's finally strong enough, goes across Asia Minor, goes all the way as far as India, from Greece to India. That's how powerful he was. Dies around age 33. And when I was 33, I don't think I'd got 200 miles from my hometown. That's an amazing accomplishment. And all the way, his whole point was, we've got to give the world Greece. We've got to give them our art. We've got to give them our knowledge, our language. We've got to share that. So he was the apostle of Hellenism, is what he's often referred to, or the missionary of Hellenism, spreading it throughout the world. And Greece, or Galatia, would have been touched by both Greece and Rome, very much so. Ermine?
It seems to me that while empires are doing things like this, individual families are moving out and away. If it's rough here, let's go someplace else where it seems to be better. And from the Tower of Babel on, that's how people...
Yes, we certainly see migrations of peoples, but even then they tended to band together with families and extended families, and it was to form tribes and clans, and it was, you didn't just pick up your wife and your two kids and go 400 miles somewhere else.
Unless you were Abraham.
Unless you were Abraham. It was very rare. So they would move in larger tribes, and we called it nomadic people. That's what they were. The Bedouins were nomadic people. So certainly we are getting that. When we look back in history, we generally focus on kind of that Middle East area, and it seemed like that was primed for migration away from that area. Why were people leaving that area? Why would you leave it now? There's no water. Growing plants is hard. The food is kind of sparse. I mean, there were some green spots, but it's always been an arid, desert-like area. And so, that's not where everyone wanted to stay. And it was hard. That was a hard limit. So if you could go somewhere where the water was good, the wildlife was good. I read a couple of years ago, y'all know Moses Lard. He was a restoration preacher. Moses Lard, when he was a boy, his dad, they didn't have any fish in their stream. They didn't have any game on their property. What little property they had, it wouldn't grow any crops. And so he said, we're going to move. And I think they moved to Indiana at that time. And he found a place where there was a creek where there were fish in it, and there were woods, and there was wild game in it, and there was level land he could plant, and there were no rocks in it. And he was excited, and then he died, and so his sons and wives had to take over the farm. But and that's how Moses Lard grew up. But the whole idea was we've got to find the place that supports us. And so migration would have been an important part. Although when it wouldn't have been an individual family, they would have moved in herds, more like. So there's that. Any other questions on the introduction or? So let's get into what we've simply referred to it as the salutation. It's not difficult. Paul, an apostle from men, or not from men, nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with me to the churches of Galatia. And so right off, he is addressing one of the issues is the fact that he calls himself an apostle. One of the themes that does run throughout the book of Galatians is that he is defending his apostleship. In fact, most of chapter 1 and 2, he's defending his apostleship, that he has a right to speak these words.
Yeah, not all the apostles accepted him right off.
No, they didn't. In fact, he'll go through that. We'll get into that next week. With later the second part of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2, there is some conflict there. But he is an apostle, but he specifies that my apostleship or my appointment to apostleship is not from men. right? It's from God. God is the one who said it. Remember, when he is converted, God tells Ananias to go to the city of Damascus and teach Paul and baptize him. And what does Ananias say? I've heard about this guy. This is probably not a good idea.
He's rough.
He could be a Trojan horse just trying to get in to spy out our liberties and persecute us. But God says what? I have appointed him for the Gentiles. I've got a purpose for him. God made this decision. It's not Paul. We can't stand up today and say, you know what, I'm going to be an apostle now. No one did that. God is the one that appointed the apostleship, and so it is not from men nor through man, or not from men nor through man. Who do you think he's talking about when he brings it down to the singular man? I don't think the high priest.
Peter's the guy with keys?
The key to what?
Peter, the guy with
Yes, yeah, I think he's talking about Peter. Because he eventually gets down to, I went there, I didn't see Peter, I got there, finally did get to meet him and get to know him, visit with him a little bit. But the idea is that Peter Peter did not appoint me. This is something separate and apart from Peter. But it is through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead. And so, this idea of Father, he's telling us exactly what Father we're talking about. This is very common in the Greek language, especially, where you set forth a person or an identity of someone or a town or something, and then they'll give a statement on, which one we're talking about. We're talking about the Father who raised him from the dead. And so that's why you have things like that statement. And all the brothers who are with me. It's not E.B. Sanders. I'll think of the name in a little bit. The picture that I had up there at the front, still have kind of little bits and pieces of it up here, is an artist's depiction of Paul, right? And most artist depictions of Paul, he's in a dank cell somewhere, and he's got the books and the parchments, and he's all alone, and he's writing, right? And that's kind of how we picture Paul writing the letters. But who's he say he was with him? He doesn't say there's a brother with me, but what? All the brothers. All of them. And look, it's brothers. There are people with Paul. So this guy wrote a book a couple of years back. And it is a possible understanding of how Paul wrote. And it would be like Paul and his buddies are sitting here, and Paul says, hey, I'm going to write a letter to the Galatians, the churches out there. And, they've been having some issues with these Jews coming in and trying to force them to require circumcision and all these things. And I want to address that because that's going to tear the church apart. And maybe Timothy's sitting there and he says, well, I think if you do that, you ought to bring something in, with their spiritual living, because circumcision, even if they were circumcision, that's not enough. They have to have this. Oh, that's a good idea. So someone's making notes and they're writing these things down. Now, I realize we hear stories like that and we think, well, what about inspiration, right? But inspiration does not override circumstance, personality, vocabulary. It's not like Paul goes into a trance and he's, the hand of God is guiding his hand, to write. That's not inspiration according to the Scriptures. These are men that had personalities, and that's important to note.
Do you think maybe it has to do with the idea of being carried along by the Spirit, where it's less it's less kind of trance like what you're saying, but everything that he wants to be there.
I think I would say that the Holy Spirit is superintending the process, right? And that leading is coming through Paul. But I also think that he is he is using his resources, which are a Timothy here and a Silas there, and Aristarchus and Titus. These men that travel with him, because how often does he start a letter and he mentions those who are with him? And I think it's because they're part of the resource that he has to draw upon, just like his own experience, education, vocabulary, understanding, style, personality. All of those come through. And I think Paul is drawing upon all of those resources superintended by God. God is using every aspect of who Paul is to give us the letter.
And we know how he felt when he was alone.
Yes.
He made it really clear that, boy, these guys are important to me.
Right.
I'm just,
And it's not like, he doesn't mean, I want these guys around me so they can sit and watch me, sit in silence while I write. I don't think that's what he's saying. Right. I think I want these guys around me because they are helping, just like we do. If we're talking about certain situations, we talk them out, and we talk to other people, we get other ideas, and, we're trying to hone down what needs to be there, And so I think that's a little bit of what's going on.
They could have been taking shorthand, and he could have been speaking.
Absolutely.
And then afterwards,
Yeah.
edit their material. My thing about telling Timothy to swing by and pick up his book and his books, and especially my notebooks.
Yeah.
Because he was working on something.
We're always working on something, So anyway, we'll stop there to the churches of Galatia, the churches of that region of Galatia. We'll pick up on the next slide next week. I appreciate your attention.